The first siren came at 2:14 a.m., not a warning, but a confirmation that the war had reached them, that the rumors weren't rumors anymore, that the quiet little border town nestled between jagged hills and empty wheat fields was no longer untouched. Lena bolted upright from the thin mattress on the floor, clutching her swollen belly as the windows shuddered and a low rumble rolled through the cracked walls like thunder with teeth. She was 8 months pregnant, alone, and 20 years old, just a girl, really from a village that used to smell like bread and lavender before the air changed. She reached for the suitcase immediately. Not the one with clothes or food. The other one, the one lined with an old quilt and tiny stitched stars on the inside lid. It was her grandmother's. Lena had spent the last few weeks preparing it in secret, just in case. Not because she wanted to, but because she'd heard what they did to babies when the tanks rolled in. They didn't shoot babies. No, they made mothers watch, then left them alive to grieve. Lena wasn't going to let that happen. Not to her baby. Not to Noah. She hadn't told anyone his name, not even her neighbor Maria, who had slipped her extra eggs and soap every week since the blockade. The suitcase had been her prayer and her plan. It had ventilation holes punched in the sides, a water canteen strapped to the inside, and a small cloth pouch sewn into the corner holding a single silver ring. The only thing Noah's father had left her when he was conscripted 2 days after the pregnancy test turned pink. Lena's fingers shook as she placed a small bundle of baby clothes and a photograph into the bottom of the case. She hadn't even given birth yet, but her body was already moving like it knew what to do, like every cell was in agreement that survival came first. The walls trembled again, dust raining from the beams above. Outside, screams fractured the night as searchlights swept across fields. She packed canned milk, 2 cloth diapers, and a lullaby music box her mother had given her before disappearing at the first sign of conflict. The last thing she placed inside was a folded flag, faded blue and gold, from the old country, a symbol of peace. Where it used to be, her heart twisted as she stood above the suitcase. Empty, waiting for Noah. But the baby hadn't come yet. And now the war had. The contractions began before dawn, each one a wave that sent lightning down her spine. She labored in silence, biting on a belt to keep from screaming. Maria was gone. The neighbors had fled. Lena bore the pain alone, gripping the doorframe as her body broke and rebuilt itself with every push. By the time Noah emerged, red and slippery and wailing with life, the sun had not risen, and the smoke was already curling over the horizon. She didn't cut the cord, just tied it with a shoelace and held him to her chest, both of them trembling. His eyes opened, wide and startled. He looked nothing like his father. Or maybe he did. It didn't matter. What mattered was the growing sound of boots, the distant thud of mortar, and the chilling hum of foreign voices echoing off brick walls. Lena wrapped Noah in her old scarf, kissed his forehead so hard it hurt, and whispered the only lullaby she could remember. "Hush now, my star. Hush now, my sky." She placed him in the suitcase, nestled him deep. He cried, a tiny soft cry, then went still as the music box began to play. She snapped the latches. She didn't weep. She couldn't. She lifted the suitcase in both arms and made her way through the crumbling alleys, barefoot, blood on her legs, the streets glowing orange from fires she dared not look at. When she reached the train station, it was chaos. People running, soldiers shouting, guns rising. But no one looked twice at a girl carrying a suitcase. No one cared. She found a cargo car, stacked with burlap sacks. No guards. No dogs. Just enough shadow. She slipped inside, wedged the suitcase between 2 crates, kissed the lid once, and whispered, "Go far, my love. Go where the sky is clean." Then she ran, back the way she came, alone. The train pulled away 2 minutes later. She heard the whistle, heard it scream through her bones. And for the first time since Noah's first cry, she collapsed. Not from pain, from the emptiness. 20 years passed. She never told anyone. Not the Red Cross worker who helped her hide in a convent. Not the refugee center officer who gave her a new name. Not the kind old man who married her in another country and loved her for the quiet woman she'd become. She never told a soul. Only the quilted suitcase under her bed remembered. She visited it on anniversaries, whispered Noah's name to it, Prayed he'd survived. Prayed someone found him. Prayed he never knew. She never had another child. The doctor said her body was too damaged from that night. But she had a bakery. She had peace. Or something like it. Until the morning the letter came. White envelope. Blue seal. Her name. Her real name. In careful block letters. She stared at it for hours before opening it. Inside, a single sentence typed, "I think I might be your son." And beneath it, a picture. A young man in army fatigues. Handsome. Bright eyes. Holding a folded flag. Please subscribe this channel and leave a comment. For the next 2 decades, Lena never spoke of the suitcase. Not to her neighbors, not to the government officials who came knocking when the war ended, and certainly not to herself. Not even in the dark solitude of her dreams where everything blurred into gunfire and lullabies. She survived the war, barely, burying her father under a fig tree after a mortar strike left him broken beside the church steps. She moved from city to city, never truly settling, haunted by the sound of train whistles and the memory of the tiny brown suitcase, and the last time she kissed her son's forehead. She always remembered his warmth, how impossibly small he felt in her hands, and she often wondered whether the scarf she wrapped him in had been enough to protect him from the cold. But whenever her heart dared to wander down that road, she shut the thought away like a drawer with a dangerous secret. For all she knew, the train had been bombed like the others. For all she knew, the suitcase was left behind in the chaos, crushed beneath boots and freight. It was better not to hope. And so, she built a life on silence, becoming a seamstress in a small village with crumbling walls and iron windows. She lived alone, stitched wedding dresses for girls younger than she had been during the war, and never attended any of the ceremonies. She didn't laugh much. She didn't cry either. Hope was a wound she had stitched shut with rusty thread. Then, in the summer of her 46th year, something strange happened. She fainted while sewing and cracked her head on the corner of her table. The local doctor rushed her to the regional hospital, but her vitals were unstable. Within hours, she was in a large city clinic with machines beeping and an emergency team preparing for cardiac surgery. She was barely conscious when the nurse asked her to sign papers, her handwriting wobbly and broken. They said a specialist had been flown in from another country, a top surgeon known for operating on impossible cases. She didn't even care. She just wanted the noise in her chest to stop. The dull, thudding ache that felt like a punishment for surviving. She faded in and out of sleep as her body was prepped, but when the surgeon finally entered the room and placed a hand on her chart, something strange stirred in her. Maybe it was his voice, low, careful, edged with warmth, or maybe it was how his fingers trembled for a second before composing themselves. She couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline beneath the sterile mask and cap. "You're in good hands," he said, and something about the way he said it, so final, so certain, made her tear up. That night, she dreamed of the suitcase. Not the explosion, not the crying, not the goodbye, but the note. The tiny note she had folded and kissed before placing beside the baby's heart. "His name is Alex. Please save him." She hadn't thought about that note in 20 years, yet now it danced before her mind like a flame refusing to be smothered. When she woke, the surgery was over. Her chest burned with incisions, but her heart beat stronger than it had in years. She blinked through the haze of morphine as the surgeon returned, now without his mask. He was tall, early 30s perhaps, with soft brown eyes and a peculiar birthmark along his jaw, like a fading thumbprint left by God himself. He introduced himself quietly. "I'm Dr. Alex Markovic." She stared at him. The world went still. Something in her body shifted. An ache buried for decades cracked open. She tried to speak, but her throat betrayed her. He pulled a chair beside her and continued. "I was adopted as a war refugee. My parents found me in a suitcase at a border town. There was a scarf and a note. I carry it with me, always." He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a thin, wrinkled piece of paper with trembling fingers. Her heart stopped. There, in fading ink, was her handwriting. "His name is Alex. Please save him." Lena couldn't breathe. Her hand reached up, shaking, and she touched his cheek with the same fingers that once swaddled him in silence and sacrifice. He closed his eyes. I don't know why, but I've always dreamed of meeting the woman who wrote this. I always wondered if she was alive. She couldn't speak. She just wept, mouth open, shoulders heaving, decades of grief flooding out in one unstoppable wave. And for the first time since the war, Lena felt like the world had stitched her back together. Not with rusty thread, but with the hands of the boy she had once hidden from it. Please subscribe this channel for more videos. Lena didn't know how to speak, how to form words when her son stood in front of her, grown, alive, real. Her lips parted, but no sound came, only a sob that caught at her throat like shattered glass. Alex, taller than she imagined, gentle-eyed and calm, didn't rush her. He just stood there, watching her face, like he was memorizing every line of a story he'd never been told. She stared at him, scanning for proof. The shape of his eyes, hers. The curve of his ears, his father's. The small freckle on his collarbone, just like the one her mother had said ran in their family. Time unraveled inside her chest. "I named you Alex," she whispered, finally, through cracked lips. "Did they keep your name?" He smiled, shy and warm. "It was written in the note. The nurses said you gave me that name when you let me go." Her eyes welled with tears again. She hadn't cried like this in years. "I didn't let you go," she said, shaking her head, her voice suddenly full of life. "I gave you away to save you. You weren't supposed to survive that night." Her hands trembled as they reached for him again. "The bombs, the train. I thought you were gone." He sat beside her, gently took her hand, and wrapped it in both of his. "I was found," he said softly, "by a soldier on that same train. He was hiding in a coal car with his injured captain. When the explosion hit, he thought it was a piece of wreckage that landed next to him. But it cried. It was me. I was wrapped in a scarf inside the suitcase." The soldier said it looked like the suitcase had been kissed by fire, but not burned. Lena covered her mouth, gasping as more memories returned. The feel of that scarf, the silent prayer she whispered into the fabric, the way she placed the note with shaking fingers. "They took me to a field hospital. The nurse who raised me later said I arrived half dead. Fever, dehydration, infection. They didn't think I'd last a week. But I did. I grew up believing I'd been abandoned, that I was just another war orphan with no past." But then, he hesitated, reaching into his bag. He pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper, something oddly sacred in the way he held it. "I became a surgeon because I always wanted to heal what I didn't understand inside myself. But even in med school, I felt a strange emptiness, like part of my story was stolen. Then, during a hospital renovation, they found an old military medical trunk. Inside, it was a box of patient files. One of them had my name written in faded ink, and inside that file, he slowly unwrapped the paper. Was this? It was the scarf, faded red, torn in places, but unmistakably the one Lena had used 26 years ago. Her hands flew to her face. "I thought it was lost forever," she murmured. He nodded. "I carried it with me to every country I worked in, every operation, every disaster zone. I didn't know why, but it felt like a thread tied to something sacred. Then, last year, I came across an online forum for war orphans and reunification stories. I posted a photo of the scarf. 2 weeks later, a woman named Esme replied. She said she knew the woman who wrapped her baby in that cloth and placed him in a suitcase during train evacuation. She said your name. Lena couldn't breathe. "Esme," she whispered. She was in the cart next to mine. We were both young, both alone. I told her what I was going to do. I begged her not to tell anyone unless she ever found you. Her whole body shook. "She found me," Alex said. "And I found you." He paused. "But that's not the end." He reached again into his bag and pulled out a second item, folded neatly, dark blue, bordered with gold trim, with a symbol embroidered at the center. "This," he said, holding it out with both hands, "save me again." Lena took it with reverence. It was a flag, not of a country, but of a relief mission. An international humanitarian symbol from a war zone she remembered from broadcasts. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "From the woman I married," he said, smiling. "She's a medic. We met during a flood response in Eastern Europe. She was carrying this when I pulled her from a capsized boat. Later, I learned this flag belonged to her brother. He died in a rescue mission. I kept it with me. I didn't know why, but it felt like it would lead me to something." He looked into Lena's eyes. and it led me here. Silence fell again, thick, sacred, full of ghosts and grace. Then she said, "Do you hate me for what I did?" His face softened. "No," he whispered. "You gave me a chance to live. You did the bravest thing any mother could do. You didn't abandon me. You saved me in the only way you could." Lena reached forward and wrapped her arms around him. This man who was her baby, her mystery, her miracle. For the first time in decades, she felt whole. War had taken everything from her, but in return, it had forged something stronger than blood. Unbreakable love reborn through fire, time, and memory. She held him tightly, vowing never to let go again. Alex had seen hundreds of patients over the years. Old men broken by war, children clinging to life, mothers whispering desperate prayers. But something about the man wheeled into his ER that rainy October night tore open a sealed wound he didn't know was still bleeding. The elderly man was unconscious, his body shivering, lips pale, a gunshot wound ripping through his thigh. Paramedics yelled out vitals as nurses surrounded him, but Alex's eyes weren't on the wound. They were locked on the photograph slipping from the man's wrinkled hand. A black and white picture, creased and fading, of a young woman clutching a baby with urgency in her arms. A scarf wrapped around her neck. A scarf Alex had seen in only one other place in his life, in a suitcase he was found in. His heartbeat thundered as he gently retrieved the photo and slipped it into his pocket, whispering an order to stabilize the patient before walking to the restroom. Face ashen, hands trembling. For days afterward, the image haunted him. He studied the face of the woman in the photograph, every curve of her jawline, every wrinkle around her fierce eyes. She looked like a ghost wrapped in agony. And yet, there was something fiercely familiar about her. As though somewhere deep in his cells, he knew that face. Anya had never told him more than what the note revealed. That a woman had begged someone to save her baby during the chaos of war. And she had found him hidden in a suitcase with a red scarf and a silver pin tucked into the folds of the blanket. She always claimed she didn't know who the mother was. But the scarf was still in Alex's drawer, and now, here was again, in this picture. This wasn't coincidence. This was a trail, a clue, a wound reopening itself with purpose. The old man, registered under the name Major Kalen Vozick, remained unconscious for 2 more days. Alex visited his room every morning, checking his vitals himself, even when it wasn't his assigned rotation. On the 3rd morning, as Alex approached the bed, Kalen's eyes fluttered open slowly, heavy with time and pain. "Where?" he rasped. "You're in St. Armand's Hospital," Alex replied, sitting beside him. "You were shot during a protest rally. You lost a lot of blood." The man nodded weakly, then tried to lift his arm but winced. Alex handed him water, and then, heart pounding, he pulled out the photograph and placed it on the side table. Kalen stared at it for a long time. His jaw trembled. "Where did you find this?" Alex asked carefully. Kalen's eyes shifted slowly toward him. "Why do you care?" "Because I think that woman might be my mother." Kalen stared at him like he had seen a ghost. Silence fell between them, thick and echoing. Then the old man exhaled deeply, tears brimming in his eyes. Her name was Lena. She was only 19 when she gave birth in the middle of an air raid. She was supposed to be evacuated with her unit, but they closed the roads. There was fighting everywhere. I was the last soldier to see her alive. Or so I thought. Alex leaned in closer, gripping the edges of the chair. "What happened to her?" Kalen swallowed hard. "We were stationed outside the border. She came running toward our truck, blood on her legs, that scarf around her neck, a baby in her arms. She begged me to take the baby, said someone was coming for her, that she wouldn't make it. I told her we couldn't take civilians, but she threw the baby at me, into my hands, and then she ran, into the smoke. I never saw her again." His voice broke as he stared at the ceiling. "I kept the picture. I kept it because that moment never left me." Alex felt the world tilt. The room blurred around the edges. This was it. Confirmation. Lena, his mother, had survived long enough to save him. She wasn't just a shadow in his past. She had fought. She had screamed. She had run through gunfire with a newborn in her arms and handed him off to fate. And fate somehow, had looped around and brought him here, full circle, back to the moment where truth cracked open. Do you know what happened to her after that? Alex asked, voice barely audible. Kalen shook his head. There were rumors that she was taken by a rebel faction, that she was tortured. Others said she made it across the border and disappeared. He looked at Alex with a kind of awe. I never imagined the baby would survive. But here you are. That night, Alex sat in his apartment, surrounded by silence. He pulled out the scar from the old suitcase, still tucked into the same compartment where Anya had left it. He laid it beside the photo and traced the patterns. Identical. Every thread, every crease. He opened his laptop and began searching records. Old military logs, newspaper articles, refugee manifests from 26 years ago. For hours, he clicked through faces, names, dates. And then, like lightning, he saw it. A news clipping from a rural village hospital in a neutral zone. A blurry photo of a woman with wide eyes and a stitched forehead, holding a small red flag in her hand. The caption read, Unnamed refugee woman found unconscious near Vita Bridge. Claims to have lost a child during war chaos. The date matched. Her face, aged, hollow, broken, was unmistakable. It was her, Lena, alive. Alex felt his lungs seize. He had found her, or at least the trail she left behind. He didn't sleep that night. He printed the photo, circled the hospital's location, and called in 2 weeks of leave from the hospital the next morning. Alex felt his lungs seize. He had found her, or at least the trail she left behind. He didn't sleep that night. He printed the photo, circled the hospital's location, and called in 2 weeks of leave from the hospital the next morning. Anya, now frail and walking with a cane, watched him pack. You're going after her, she said quietly. Yes, Alex whispered. You always knew this day would come. She nodded. Just remember, you were loved every single day, no matter what she had to do to let you go. He embraced her tightly, the suitcase, the one that once carried a baby, resting on the floor beside them. As the plane took off, Alex stared out the window, holding the scarf and the flag. He was returning to the land that tried to bury him, returning not as a victim, not as a statistic, but as a man with hands trained to save, a heart full of longing, and a history clawing its way back into the light. Somewhere out there, his mother, Lena, might still be alive. And this time, he would be the one to run toward her. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The wind stirred dry leaves across the porch of the worn-out cottage nestled in the arms of the silent Carpathian hills. Alex felt like the entire world had paused. No heartbeat, no breath, only her eyes. Her aged face was lined with time and torment, but in her trembling gaze, he saw something disturbingly familiar. The same pain he had carried for years. Lena stepped back, as if afraid touching him would cause him to vanish. Her hands, gnarled with time and cold, lifted to her mouth, and a whimper, part prayer, part disbelief, slipped from her cracked lips. You're him, she choked, almost inaudibly. Alex stepped forward slowly, holding out the photo the old soldier had given him. Is this you? He asked, his voice shaking. She reached for it with reverence, her fingers trembling as if she were touching a holy relic. Her eyes welled up. That scarf. It was yours, she whispered. You had no name, no papers. I couldn't even say goodbye. The photo fell from her hands as she stumbled back and leaned against the doorframe. He caught her arm instinctively, and their skin met for the first time. Mother and son, separated by war, reunited by fate. The moment shattered something inside both of them. She led him inside, to a one-room cottage filled with the scent of lavender and wood smoke, and they sat across from each other at a table stained with age and memory. Lena stared at him like she was staring at a ghost that had grown taller than she dreamed. I never wanted to let you go, she said. I had no choice. That winter, they were bombing the hospital. No food, no power. I wrapped you in every layer I had. I put my scarf around your face and placed you in the suitcase because it was all I had left to protect you. I ran until my feet bled, and when I reached the evacuation convoy, I screamed for someone to take you. But they wouldn't wait. So I left you there. I watched them drive off, praying that someone would open that case before the cold did. Her voice cracked, and her shoulders folded inward like the weight of remembering crushed her lungs. Alex, his throat dry, replied someone did. He told her about the soldier who found him on the side of the road, about the years in the orphanage, the foster families, the letters he wrote to a mother who never wrote back. He shared how he had grown up with a scar above his hip. One the doctors said was from shrapnel. She gasped and reached under her blouse, pulling out a faded photograph she had carried for 3 decades. Her holding a baby, tiny and bundled in the scarf. "They told me you died," she whispered. "I waited at every refugee center, searched lists, hospitals, graves, but no one had your name. No one had your photo." Tears streamed down both their faces now. "I thought you were gone forever." He leaned forward, his hands reaching across the table, and took hers in his. "I found you, didn't I?" he said softly. "You gave me life twice. Once when you gave birth, and again when you chose to save me." She nodded, unable to speak. Then, Alex unzipped the side of his duffel bag and pulled out the folded piece of cloth, the flag that had once covered a mass grave where the soldier had found him. "This," he said, gently placing it in front of her, "was with me that night. They say it belonged to a medic who died protecting the children." Lena's eyes widened. "That flag, that's the regiment my brother served in," she whispered. "He was supposed to meet me at the border." Her hands clutched the fabric. He must have stayed to help and never made it out. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of every second they had lost, every word left unsaid, every birthday uncelebrated. They cried without shame. Outside, the snow had started to fall again, soft and silent. Later that evening, they sat by the fire, and Lena brought out a wooden box she had kept hidden for 30 years. Inside were tiny baby shoes, a piece of the scarf, and a faded birth record with a smudged footprint. "I knew you were out there," she said, smiling through her tears. "And I told myself, if you ever came back, I would know it was you by your eyes." He smiled. "I didn't come back with riches, or fame, or the perfect life. But I came back with the one thing I've searched for my entire life." She tilted her head, her eyes soft. "And what's that?" Alex leaned in and said, "You." In that small, broken cottage at the edge of the world, 2 souls that had once been torn apart by chaos were pieced back together. One story, one memory, one heartbeat at a time. And as the wind howled through the trees like the echoes of history, Lena and Alex sat in its warmth, not as strangers brought together by coincidence, but as mother and son finally home. The gravel crunched softly beneath his boots as Alex walked up the narrow path to the small, stone care home nestled between the remnants of a war-scarred village and the edge of a dense, whispering forest. The wind carried the scent of old wood, drying leaves, and something else, something faintly floral that reminded him of childhood, though he couldn't explain why. Inside his coat pocket, the worn-out scarf was clutched tightly in his fist, and a tiny flag folded precisely the way his sergeant had taught him in the army rested against his chest. With every step, his heart hammered harder. He had crossed oceans and borders, searched dusty archives, and listened to ghosts of a history most wanted to forget. But now he stood on the final doorstep. Inside, the nurse greeted him with a soft nod, eyes wide with silent understanding. She led him down a hallway where walls were lined with fading photographs and embroidered doilies, the kind only someone's grandmother would make. Room 14. He paused outside it, the old brass number slightly askew. He reached up, fixing it without thinking, as if he had done so 1,000 times before. Then he knocked gently. "Come in," said a voice, hoarse, aged, but oddly familiar. He stepped inside. The woman sitting by the window didn't turn right away. Her gray hair was pulled into a loose braid, her hands folded on her lap, a faded book resting beside her. "I was told someone wanted to see me," she said softly. "Yes," Alex replied, barely managing the word. She turned then, and, the moment their eyes met, something passed between them, something electric and ancient like a cord snapping back into place after decades. Her eyes, pale green with a ring of gold around the iris, mirrored his own. Her hand instinctively rose to her mouth as she stood, trembling. "No," she whispered, shaking her head slowly. "It can't be. I buried you. I watched them take you from the suitcase. You weren't breathing. She broke down before she could finish. Alex moved forward, tears already falling down his cheeks. I lived, he said, his voice cracking. I was found, taken to a shelter, then adopted. I had your scarf. He pulled it out now, unfolded, soft and fraying, but unmistakably hers. She gasped, reaching for it, as if it were part of her soul being returned. Her hands gripped it, pressed it to her chest. Lena Petrova, he said gently. My mother. She sat back down, overwhelmed, the flood of 30 years crashing over her. I looked for you, she whispered. After the war, I wrote letters, visited every hospital. I kept this photo, she said, pulling from the drawer a photograph of her younger self, holding a baby wrapped in that same scarf. I dreamed of hearing you cry just once more. Alex knelt in front of her, pulling the folded flag from his coat. You gave me life. I wanted you to know I made something of it. He unfolded the flag. This was flown during a rescue mission, one where I saved 43 lives. I carried it every mission after, but it never belonged to me. He gently placed it in her lap. It belonged to the woman who gave everything to protect a life no one else valued. She ran her fingers over the stitching, shaking silently. I didn't think I deserved to be called your mother, she said. Not after I left you like that. He took her hand, rough and thin but still strong beneath the age. You did the bravest thing a person could do. You chose my life over your own comfort, your safety, your peace. That wasn't abandonment. That was love. She wept thin, deep, soul-cracking sobs that came from a place only a mother who had grieved for decades could know. And he let her cry. When the tears slowed, she looked at him again, soaking in every detail of the man she had imagined every night since the war. Do you have a name? She asked. I go by Alex, he replied. But I found something on the note you left with me. It said, for my son, Alexei. My last breath, my only hope. She blinked, stunned. That's what I called you. Alexei, my father's name. She smiled faintly through the tears. May I call you that again? He nodded. You always could. For the next few hours, they sat together as the sun set behind the hills, the sky painted in soft golds and purples. She told him stories of hiding in cellars with only candlelight and lullabies, of smuggling bread and hollowed books. Of the night, she placed him in the suitcase beneath blankets and slipped him onto a train with strangers, not knowing if she would ever see him again. He shared stories of his childhood, of the kind couple who raised him in a distant land, of how he became a medic because some part of him was always drawn to saving others, never knowing why. When a nurse came in to check on them, she paused, taken aback by the light in Lena's face, the first in decades. You look like you've seen a miracle, the nurse whispered. Lena nodded. I didn't see a miracle, she said, her voice clear and certain. I raised one from the grave with nothing but a scarf and a prayer. As the stars emerged outside, Alexei placed the scarf back around her shoulders, gently tucking it in like a son would for a mother on a cold night. I'm not leaving again, he said. You won't have to wonder anymore. And in that small room, 2 lifetimes finally stitched themselves back together, like fabric once torn but never discarded, reunited by war, by memory, and the silent, eternal heartbeat of a mother's love. Please subscribe this channel, like this video, and leave a comment.